Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a full review, finally here for Scarmonde, which still remains really fun to say. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into it here. Just so I don't forget like I did last time, thank you to Effium, the guy that made this thing, for making this thing, because it's really darn fun. Now, before we even get started on this whole thing, there's going to be a few kind of, retreadings of stuff from the first impressions for folks that watch that. And yes, we are already onto a full review as the immediate next video after that, because frankly, there was another game that I was going and trying to do a first impressions of before that, and it left such a bad taste in my mouth that I just kind of blitzed through this game and started a second playthrough. So yeah. Good sign there as far as this being a good enough design to wash the taste of something terrible out of your mouth. Now, a couple of things before we get going here. So, as far as what this game is, it's a classic RPG, basically taking in all of the best stuff from all of those kind of classic RPG type things, like for the early Final Fantasies, stuff like the Final Fantasy Legend slash Saga series, as well as if you happen to play any PC RPGs back in the day. Like for me personally, one of the first RPGs I ever played, like of this style anyway, was this old DOS game by the name of Avalon, which by the way, that dev's a pretty cool guy too. He's actually still around to this day, still composing music, because that soundtrack absolutely slapped. But essentially, what we're looking at here is a very classic style RPG, but with the awesome trappings of the kind of a newer party balancing, newer ideas as far as how the world should be designed and stuff like that, as well as lots of good quality of life stuff. And there's a lot of bits and pieces to this that just blends into this beautiful mix of new and old that I would say is in many cases just a better way to experience that overall feeling than frankly most that I've seen out there. So, like, for example, one of those early RPG issues that tends to come up is, like, well, you have hidden mechanics, but how do you convey those mechanics, right? How is it that you can potentially convey what makes your party special? And so, like, in this particular case, you actually have a custom, essentially a custom-built party. Your characters are picked from a list of, I think it's like a dozen different classes, and essentially you just roll with whatever they've got. They give you a little brief synopsis over what they do, and you just kind of roll with it. It's like, oh, dancer dances and supports buffs. Okay, that's pretty cool. But then, let's say they have a hidden feature where they have a chance to charm on hit, which, makes sense. They're a dancer, they're kind of flirty, all that kind of thing. Or you've got your sage over there, who's kind of an AoE specialist of all kinds, whether it's exploding entire parties or healing your entire party. And in their particular case, I think their thing is additional experience, which again makes sense. Like you notice that they've got less experience to the next level than pretty much everybody else, despite being in the same fights. And so makes sense. They're a smart, kind of scholarly sort. You can put those two together. Or let's say the knight seems to reflect magic every now and then. It only seems to have triggered once so far, but still. This initial kind of opening to the game, where you only have basic pieces of equipment, it's interesting that it actually does a pretty solid job of cluing you into what your hidden features of your party may be. Probably less so in the one that I initially started with. So, like for example, if I go back to the initial party here, like this is the team that I actually began the game with. Like let's say the ranger has a chance to insta-kill on attack, and so that didn't exactly convey to me personally for a decently long time. Also, by the way, a little bit of a side note, I absolutely love the flurry bow. That's the thing that that just detonates the entire enemy team. So she's got multiple opportunities to just insta-kill everything on the entire team. It's pretty fun to screw around with. Anyway, main point that I'm trying to get across here is you've got complete and total control over whatever you'd like in your party, kind of starting off with the teams that you start with. But hell, if you wanted to, do a challenge run or whatever else, you wanted to go do a solo run, you wanted to do a duo run, some kind of, roleplay run or whatever else, you've got all of these different options available to you, and it's just really fun to play with these different party members. Like that first time through, the party that I went through that first time, it ended up having a almost completely different feel to the one that I'm running right now. So like in that particular case, I was given a little bit of a warning, like, hey, you probably want to run a healer. Like just saying, like, do whatever you want, but also remember to bring a healer. And so I was going into the whole thing pretty darn cautiously. So I had what's known as a Duskar, which is like a guy that steals health on attack. Had a monk that said that they heal. Had the bard, which I kind of assumed was sort of a red mage kind of deal. They're not really, but sort of. And so I figured, okay, that's, multiple lightweight healers. Got the ranger, for additional item discovery and stuff like that. So the bard's giving additional money, the ranger's giving additional items. So I'm thinking like, okay, I got some pretty good kind of logistical layers to this team, and it ended up working reasonably well. And then with this particular party, they ended up playing entirely different. So they don't have any kind of healing stuff that they can learn right away. So for example, when it came to early game equipment, our exploration has been a little bit more hindered, but the thief, for example, has been able to steal multiple pieces of equipment for different party members off of various enemies. And stuff like the sage was able to overcome their lack of logistics with sheer firepower, and make more use of the guarding mechanic, where, for example, MP is actually very hard to come by. Like you'll notice even our MP specialist here, I just noticed I went back to town and forgot to heal. Oh well, anyways, even our MP specialist only has 15 MP, and her main spell right now costs 2, so she tends to burn through pretty quickly. And so you have this interesting back and forth here, where essentially she can guard to get enough MP back to do a couple of things. The rest of the team can sort of cover for her. Where, for example, my dancer there has a chance to inflict charm with her spear. The thief has a chance to poison with his dagger, and so, for example, they can take over in that particular instance. Let's go pick up some items over here. I forget if there's anything else out here, but I'm just going to go collect some items. Now, next thing I want to discuss here is the world design, because I love the world design in this thing. I mean, you could argue that this game, for all intents and purposes, is a series of very immersive, kind of back of the box mazes combined with a battle system. And I mean, it goes way deeper than that. But man, oh man, there's so many fun little mazes throughout everywhere, and I love how they tie together. So imagine the kind of crazy creative dungeon design from back in the day, where obviously they had to get pretty out there with some of their designs to make them stick out, when you're going around with friggin' NES graphics and stuff like that. But combine that with better overall ideas nowadays on how to make certain sounds carry across. So the sound design tends to be pretty darn on point for a lot of these areas. Like you noticed earlier, we had that abandoned camp, and it's just a wind effect off in the background. We've got some quiet, almost kind of like church organ sound and music over here in this fortress. We occasionally run into other kind of NPCs and such who are off on their own adventure here. Because okay, we'll get into the story in a little bit, but like the world design is absolutely on point. You don't actually interact with a lot of the you don't necessarily need to interact, rather, with a lot of the kind of environment and stuff like that. So you more or less just explore around and see what happens. And so, for example, you may not necessarily go into a place and just find a bunch of lore located in books. Instead, you see it all through world design. Again, very Souls-esque in that way. I know everything in its mother gets compared to Dark Souls, but like it's very accurate in this particular case. That a lot of your world design comes from the fact that it's like, why is this place in ruins? Why is this place abandoned? And what's interesting is if you pay attention to everything, you'll notice that they actually provide answers to this stuff, and that's just really cool to see. Let's go ahead and have a regard for a little bit of extra MP. Let's go ahead and use our thief with his very, very sticking out chin here to go heal our dude over here. Hopefully get us back on track a little bit. We are getting a little bit worn down as you do. But I just want to reiterate, I love how the different parties can play entirely different, and just can feel entirely different on different playthroughs, even though the mechanics are technically the same. Now, as far as the shortcut design, that's another just thing of beauty here, because you'll notice as you carry along that there's just shortcuts everywhere, leading into all kinds of different stuff, little hints here and there over where there might be additional hidden routes, or just like one-off mechanics to a certain area. Hell, you'll go into some zones and then just suddenly get hexed with like permanent debuffs to just give you something different to play with in the area. It feels like every zone was going out of its way to try and be unique there, So it does a pretty darn solid job of just giving you a reason to kind of explore enough in a very how do I even put this? Like, it's a very chill kind of exploration because most of the stuff that you need is going to be noticeably conveyed. Like, you'll notice right here, hey, all of these drop-offs we probably can't interact with. It looks like a normal drop-off. And then you'll see one that's colored differently. It's like, oh, hey, look, I can probably fall off that. Neat, you know? So that's pretty good there. And because of the different ways that these different parties function, again, it allows your team to feel very supportive of each other, where again, we can just keep getting MP back with our Sage over there, so that hopefully she can carry the whole rest of the team later on down the road. And so let's say, you know, she was going and guarding for additional MP right now, and now she can go ahead and attack with a stick, he can attack with that, and then we can hopefully offset some of our healing costs later by the fact that we're getting additional, you know, magic potions over there. Maybe we can do something more with that. It just gives you good stuff to play with. Let's see, piece of 3 obtained. Okay, fantastic. We'll need one of those later. Let's go ahead and pop this sucker on this knight guy over here and continue on. Alright, now let's get into combat mechanics. So, what's interesting is that you not only have your typical, you know, like you pick one class and kind of go from there type situation, but if I can go over to my other save file here real quick, you actually can multi-class to a almost comical degree. So I really love this. When it comes to the multi-classing thing, you can subclass everyone in your team, okay? You can give them sort of characteristics from these other classes. They still will primarily be their primary class. So, for example, let's say Sierra over here, the Bard, she's somebody that let's say has a certain type of, you know, certain subset of equipment that she can wear. She has a certain set of skills that she's ultra specialized in. So, like, if we go to her stuff and we learn her skills over here for the Bard, you know, she learns a lot of varied abilities as your sort of red mage type would do. However, when it comes to those subclasses, this also means, for example, if she goes to the Cleric, she'd be able to get about, like, roughly 2/3 of the ability that they would potentially have. You know, a lot of better resurrection abilities, certain type of resistances, the ability to maybe ignore some criticals and stuff like that, as well as unlocking light armor. Or let's say for the Thief, she'd be able to spec into daggers at that point, since right now she's on, like, stabs, longbows, and spears, I think. Something like that. The Bard's equipment is kind of odd. But still, the point is they get some of the skills, but not all the skills. So, for example, let's say she can steal, but she wouldn't be able to do the better ability that allows them to specifically pick what thing they want to steal, which the Thief can do, but as a subclass, they can just sort of steal something, you know? So it's cool to see how that all ends up playing out. Like, she ends up getting a lot of those big AoEs, but she maybe doesn't get a lot of those same recovery abilities. But yeah, again, the subclassing goes hilariously in this one, and so, like, let's say on my first playthrough, I ended up just using one of my subclasses over here on my main character, because this was meant to be like a Knight of Lotus team, and so I had to give him Knight, so it's like, you know, whatever, he lives up to his name there, which ended up working well, because it gave some additional physical attack, but this could have potentially opened up a lot of different types of weapons for him, though it doesn't unlock the ability to guard. I was actually kind of hoping that it would open that up for him. Whereas, for example, he was extremely defensive, though, and so, for example, his ability to let's say, unlock this tackle ability ended up scaling exceptionally well with his freakishly high defense. So, quick note here, I kind of forgot to mention that, yeah, you can, like, throw all your different subclasses on one person if you want. So, like, my Ranger was completely done, or I guess Hunter was completely done, my Monk was as efficient as I wanted him to be, my Tank guy was tanking real good, and then I figured, you know what, I wondered if it'll actually let me subclass somebody 3 times in a row, and it totally does. Point is, you can get pretty darn creative with this stuff. You have a lot of freedom when it comes to your units, and this is before we even get into their equipment. See, the equipment is also just kind of really fun in its design here. Early on, I mentioned that the sort of starting phase of the game is fairly basic as far as your equipment is concerned, and so your initial stuff doesn't really have very many effects on it. And this again just kind of gives you that little window to hopefully realize, like, hey, you know, my units are maybe doing this automatically. It's just part of who they are. It didn't say it anywhere. You know, hidden mechanics. You can have your opinion, however it is on there, but they do give you that window to discover that. You know, giving you about roughly 30 minutes worth of gameplay. As well as a boss to figure that stuff out. And so this ends up working really darn solidly in that case. But as you go on, you get more and more pieces of equipment with specific effects. So, like, let's say you've got some that are sort of the Golden Sun style things here, where you just attack a second time with a specific ability. ability. But then you also get a lot of specific effects on your stuff here. So like, let's say we've got debuff resistance and ailment resistance on this shield that allows her to evade a lot of things, but it also makes her bad at just evading physical attacks themselves, but again, avoids crits and a lot of different types of debuffs. Little bit of a caveat here that I want to throw in here, just because it's one of those things that confused me personally, but just so you're aware going into this whole thing, when it says debuffs and ailments, they're basically two different classes of what would normally just be debuffs. And if you're wondering what exactly constitutes a, like, let's say an ailment, that would be all of these ones, and then debuffs would be the other stuff. So that can be confusing at first. It definitely was, I haven't ever seen them parsed out in that specific way before, but it is, it is what it is. So, so just so you know, that is a thing there. So ailments are typically going to be most of the stuff that you view as your standard, like, debilitating debuffs, and then typically the debuffs are going to be the ones that are a bit more stat related and stuff like that. Okay. So that being said, let's go back to talking about equipment. So this equipment, again, gets very oddly specific. Sometimes going and giving you multiple attacks. So, like, let's say here, like, something like the swift weapons would give you multiple attacks for that particular unit, but might vastly debuff them as a result. So, like, the swift claw on my monk here would cause him to lose about half of his health and a lot of his other stats here, but he would be able to attack 3 times. And this might mean that he might have a hard time hitting defense thresholds to actually punch through, but let's say we combine that with some relics over here that, let's say, gave him different debuffs on his attacks, that would give him a lot more 50% chance rolls to actually hit on those things. So, like, let's say we gave him one debuff that caused him to have, like, he passively can learn stun on all of his attacks. Let's say we give him one thing that gives him 15% poison, and another thing that gives him 50% like confusion or something, right? You might notice there's a lot of modification type items, quite a few of them in fact, or let's say, curse on hit or something like that, or health steal or something like that, and we could combine all of those as well as a high counter attack rate to have him spread debuffs like an absolute maniac, And one of those other cool little touches when it comes to the equipment here is that units will have specific additional slots, essentially duplicates of existing slots depending on who they are. So, like, let's say the monk has 2 glove slots, which, for example, on its own doesn't seem like, like, why, who cares, they get an extra glove slot, and then you have stuff like the action gloves that gives you a 20% chance of extra turns. So he basically would have a 40% chance of just taking an extra action now if he used both those slots for that. He would massively debuff himself because they are also one of those items that's really good, and pretty much anything that crazily improves your action economy tends to tank your stats. But again, it seems to have done a pretty darn solid job over the, as far as I can tell, like, year or two of balancing passes that it's gotten to really make that stuff feel good. So just so you know, again, there's a lot of different things like that, and this also means that you can triple round as the game goes on. So it's really cool to see all of this stuff, again, like mentioned in, for example, let's say the attributes here, where like, if you have specific weirdness, like MP regeneration or aggro percentage, or the strength of their guards and things like that, it'll tend to give you a better idea of what you're playing with. And so all of this stuff, while it's presented in a very retro, simplistic kind of way, tends to lead to very, very kind of a tricky team building that you're just constantly tweaking around. And that's one of those things that I really love, because when it comes to an RPG, to me, the thing that is kind of indicative of a well-damn-made RPG is when you are constantly going back and adjusting your builds and just trying new stuff. As soon as it becomes stale, like as soon as you have a set meta that you're running with, it's dead to me. Like, that's kind of where I'm done. And for example, most of what I cover on this channel is Tactics Ogre, and it's part of those reasons that I've consistently said that both Reborn and One Vision absolutely hit that mark. You're constantly going back and redoing your skills and redoing your equipment and redoing all this stuff, and it feels amazing to constantly have to go and kind of retool your builds. Kind of that old Armored Core mentality, as it were. Whereas, for example, the original PSP version of Tactics Ogre, it was a case of like, well, you got everybody strengthened anatomy and a longbow, I guess you're basically done till post-game. And that's no exaggeration. I've done a solo run before where it was literally just like, you max out the weapon skill, max out anatomy, and you're kind of coasting for about the next 40 hours. Anyway, so As far as I'm concerned, that is the best sign of a solid RPG, that you constantly want to go back and retool those builds, and everyone feels like they work a little bit differently. So I'm not going to spoil, more of those items that you can find, because there's a lot of fun to be found in just discovering these different item effects and stuff. All right, so next let's go ahead and talk about the story, because surprisingly, despite what seems to be exploring a more or less open world here, and yes, we did just stab that wizard in such a way that the dancer convinced him to off himself. Despite what seems like exploring an empty world, it goes surprisingly deeper than that. So I don't even necessarily know how I would describe how the story's done, because it does explore a lot of kind of cool mentalities of what made these old RPGs special, in terms of giving you an idea that you want to keep exploring, you want to find out more about this world, you want to see more of what it's doing, you want to see more of what people are up to, and then at the same time, everything just seems like it has an additional layer every time you circle back. I know that's vague. I don't want to spoil anything, but it did take some pretty darn fun turns, and I appreciate the hell out of that. In fact, actually, I mentioned earlier that you run into NPCs kind of like Dark Souls style, and that's, again, a solid point as far as the world building is concerned. Those moments when it feels like you're circling back and everything just feels different in the context of, like, the beginning of the game, middle game, end game, and it just feels like you're always looking back and reassessing the stuff that you've already seen, trying to figure out what exactly was the truth or not, what exactly what shortcuts might have maybe had some additional implications and stuff like that. Yeah, that continuously ends up being the case here. And one of those moments that really did it for me was specifically one of the NPCs that you run into a few times, who ended up being a boss fight. The way that it's phrased, I think it's actually avoidable, but I gotta say props to the dev for that particular boss, because not only did they give a lot of folks a lot of issues as far as actually getting through the thing, but I also want to mention that the way that they're set up, it's one of the few times I've seen in just kind of any RPG really, where you hear somebody talking about their kind of solo adventure through an RPG, and then as soon as you end up actually fighting them, it's like, yeah, you know what? Your skill set, I can absolutely believe that is exactly what you've been up to here. Like, as soon as you start fighting them, it's like, yeah, I see, with that loadout right there, I see exactly why it is that you've made it this far. So, either way, there's that. Now, I'm not going to go farther into detail on that, but I just really appreciated that particular setup. Also, I'm trying to get to that last chest before we escape. There we go. Actually, one little quality of life thing I want to mention here. These orbs. I really love the design of these orbs. So, this is actually something that I went and praised Kingsvane for extensively. When it comes to RPGs that are able to essentially weaponize exploration as a way to advance your characters, all right? So when it comes to, again, RPGs, one of the worst things that they can do is become stale, and this is actually something that I've been critical of Final Fantasy Tactics about, even though I love that game. The fact that you can sit there and essentially grind and get all of your skills immediately just creates this situation of like, well, if you can do that, why don't you? You get bonuses as soon as you complete the class, as soon as you get new classes, you're going and passing those skill points on to everybody else. Why don't you get JP up and grind and become a god? And the same thing applies for something like, Tactics Ogre PSP. Again, just to go back to the SRPG roots of this channel here, in terms of the exploration there, it's like, it basically constantly gives you this feeling of, well, instead of exploring, you stop, you grind, and you get ridiculously powerful. And in this case, just like something like Kingsvane there, we have essentially a situation where exploring is your skill points, more or less. And so, like, let's say we just got some points right now, right? We ended up exploring an area, we ended up getting a few more orbs to spend. Now, these orbs, they're not... Immediately, the thing that comes to mind is stuff like Final Fantasy X, even though it's not remotely the same kind of system, but I think it's just the fact that it's orbs. But effectively, you get experience points. Actually, I guess the better example would have been something like Sultan Sanctuary, because that's really more how they're spread out. You just get these skill points that you can spend as you will. And early on, you'll just get them, let's say, from boss fights, from chests. You will occasionally get one here and there from various enemies that you fight. And it'll be enough to, let's say, round out your collection, but it won't necessarily be enough to get, entire new skills by yourself. As you probably noticed earlier, looking at that skill list from like 25 hours into the game, you won't really get enough of these to buy everything or even most of everything. So you still got to remain selective about your choices as you carry on through the game. And so this means that, again, you're kind of limited in a fun way with your skills. So the skills in this case, unlike, let's say, King's Vein, where they were required for world traversal, they're entirely combat-based in this one, or logistics-based for the most part. So, for example, you can use your healing abilities outside of combat, but let's say that character's knocked out, they can't exactly revive themselves, And so again, that kind of interesting need for logistics remains there. That MP is kind of hard to come by. You can't guard outside of combat, and so are you going to spend your limited MP, or are you going to spend your limited items, or are you just kind of going to retreat back to your hub, recover, and figure out a new kind of angle of attack here? And again, I love that. Like, this one really makes you explore, especially in the early game. The early game is all about this exploration, and as time goes on, you get different vehicles, you get different means of traversal, different kind of warp points, checkpoints to different areas. Like, it just feels like the world opens up and up and up and up and up, and I did not get the bridge yet, so let me go get that. Like, it just feels like it keeps getting more and more open, and I love that. So yeah, world design feels a ton of fun to go through. The different parties play entirely different, and as far as the story goes, I really was not going into this expecting to care much for the writing. I thought it was going to be, kind of a throwaway plot as you'd kind of expect from something like this, but like, no, it actually went places, and it did actually hit some emotional notes there, so that's kind of surprising. And what's more is that it really manages to hit those questions. Like, to me, the world design, what I really love about it is that it constantly makes you ask questions. It constantly makes you wonder, why is it that this place is abandoned? Why is it that X, Y, or Z thing is happening? Why is this here? Because again, it's not a throwaway. It does actually manage to answer those questions subtly. Like, it's not going to be in your face about a lot of this stuff, but it is going to explain it. Also, the reason I'm using the mouse all of a sudden is because I wanted to remember to remind people that there is actually a point-and-click option if you would prefer, or if you wanted to see if there was a convenient route to somewhere and you weren't sure if it was open yet. So you can just kind of click on it. One of those things that has no reason to come up in a review for the most part, but, it's there. I mention when there's extra mouse features every now and then. One of those oddly specific things of doing stuff on a Steam Deck, that you kind of want to test both controls at the same time. Alright, quick little side note to talk about the music, because I just want to say, like, this thing has had different themes in every area for the most part, but, like, it somehow continues to slap more and more in every new area that you go to. Specifically, I wanted to show off that, this particular area just kind of happens to have randomized music, so, I specifically just want to show off some of the sounds here, because it's just, again, it just continues to slap. There are so many battle themes that they literally can dedicate an entire area to just showing off different battle themes. It's kind of nuts to me. I'm trying to even think how many games are out there that might have potentially had something like this, but it just never really comes up. Like, you'll occasionally see, maybe they'll have one new theme for an entire area, but you usually don't see 7 or 8 different battle themes for an entire zone, So, either way, this theme, I think, was for one of the bosses, or like maybe 2 or 3 of the bosses. Don't remember which ones, but sure as hell slaps regardless. Actually, there's a lot of little kind of audio hints towards other things. Like, there's one theme in particular that I want to show off here. Specifically, I'm showing off this area because every one of these tiles triggers another event. Here, we'll go ahead and see if we can escape from this one. Alright, we already showed off this one. It's like the standard boss theme. It's pretty good, but where's the one I'm looking for? Let's see. This was like a mid-boss theme kind of situation. Okay, we'll go ahead and go off for another one. Okay, we already listened to this. Like, this is one of these ones that I actually went and put, well, as soon as somebody posted online, but as soon as it goes online, this is going straight on my playlist. Like, this is one that shows up for most of the dragon bosses and stuff like that. This is, like, I'm assuming that's why it has that, like, fire effect in the background, which is pretty darn sweet. There it is. I appreciate the cheekiness of having something that sounds like this in here. Except they leave that part out. Like one of those, hey, do you recognize this from somewhere kind of moments? Alright, anyways, let's go ahead and move on. Because you never know when it might be an additional fun feature. Alright. Let's see. So next, let's go ahead and just kind of talk about talk a little bit more about some of this world here. So the design of the different areas, I will say, took me again a little bit by surprise here. Because there's a lot of different settings, as you might have already seen already. I mean, we've got a pretty standard fantasy stuff so far that you've seen in this video. Up to and including later on, including just floating sky islands, including just a straight up hell area that you're just on fire the entire time that you're there. You've got abandoned places here, little settlements that you run across. There's just always more questions to ask, and again, I love it for that. The types of questions that it makes you consider is just, it's such a good time, man. Again, I really was not expecting to be as enthralled by this thing as I have been, but again, you know, multiple playthroughs in at this point, and I still want to keep going. Well, actually, technically one playthrough, and then I'm in the middle of this one, so it's not, you know what I'm getting at. Anyway. But yeah, the world remains fun to explore. The setting is just really cool, and I just love that the characters play differently. But as far as the world design goes, there were areas that, let's say, reminded, like, they looked like they came straight up out of, like, Phantasy Star 2. You had other areas that looked like they were made out of the remnants of Metropolis Zone from Sonic 2. Apparently, we're just going to compare everything to Genesis games today. But yeah, there were a lot of interesting, unique, kind of one-off zones and interesting zones. It's good, man. It's just good stuff. So I love that. There's a good amount of unique items that again change the way that your characters play. Like you might have noticed when I was showing off that other save file there, that I had one guy that was permanently holding up his hands up to guard, because one of the accessories just causes you to perma guard and stuff like that. Again, they all just play differently, and it's fun for that. In fact, actually, in this particular case, I probably should have retreated and restocked on items, because this party, believe it or not, is entirely built around the idea of proving something that I was told was objectively true about this game wrong. Namely, that when it comes to healing, that it's something that you definitely need. So I made a party that's near incapable of healing, just to see how it plays. And again, I've loved it. This kind of scavenging for equipment with a thief thing I find very immersive. But yeah, zone design is fantastic. The shortcuts are really well planned out. In fact, I love how the starting dungeon, like one of the very earliest places you can possibly run into, actually has an area that seems like a completely pointless shortcut that I thought would do absolutely nothing. It just seemed like it was sort of an extra thing to teach you that there's always going to be a shortcut to unlock later. Only to then find out, like 20 hours into the game, that there was actually an alternate use for that shortcut. Like, it was... it's just great. Also, quick little thing to make sure to basically buy out all the healing herbs before they can become crazy expensive. Actually, it's interesting to see how limited this party's budget is compared with my first time through when I had a bard who's there just, like, generating additional money, and I had a ranger that was collecting additional items. Like, obviously, when it comes to RPG design, in order to make the mechanics feel good, you know, your particular effects are going to feel particularly good. So just know that, yeah, it will probably feel a little bit easy after a little while. I don't know why I took this route. This is not the right way to go. So, like, as the game progresses, like, I would say probably around the 15-hour mark or so, with exception to one room, it kind of got to the point that a lot of the fights were a decent bit on the easy side. Though I will say, largely that was due to the fact that that particular build I was using just involved turning the Ranger into a more or less infinite grenade machine gun. So, you know, RPG mechanics doing their job, basically. They did their job exactly right, and it made stuff relatively easy, and that is exactly how it was designed to be done. So, good job on doing exactly what you needed to do. Also, it made it easy, which some people consider a downside. There is no way to make everybody happy. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on. Like, even the final boss gave relatively... Okay, it's funny because it didn't even necessarily give relatively little issues. It it did give some issues, but I just noticed I really appreciate the callback that it did. Because there's certain really particularly rough areas that had specific unique mechanics I never really even thought about until now that they actually called back to in that particular boss fight. And that, oh man, that's actually some really damn solid design. I mean, overall, the world design, battle design, whatever else, I love it so far. I say so far, I've pretty much dang near 100%ed it outside of one particular hat and playing it through with every class. So yeah, absolutely adore this thing. I again appreciate the little quiet moments in between. One thing that it does definitely appreciate is just letting scenes breathe. That is something that a lot of RPGs fail to do because they're trying to give you more and more stuff to fight. But for example, your encounter rate on the overworld is not particularly high, so it typically tends to let you appreciate the size of the world a bit more. When it comes to certain abandoned areas, you'll have fewer encounters there. Let's say you're exploring around in a boat or other type of ship that may or may not fly. You can find yourself in situations that there's no encounters whatsoever, and it just feels nice. It makes you appreciate those vehicles a lot more. To just be able to just finally have a moment's peace with no encounters and whatnot. Again, very Phantasy Star 4-esque in that particular way. Though I will say on one of those particular vehicles, I find it interesting that one of them you can just kind of call upon whenever you get to water. The other one, you specifically have to go back to wherever you left it, which makes sense. It is unique, but also just kind of makes me wonder. Why you couldn't just like again just do the Fantasy Star 4 thing of just pocketing it. But it is what it is. I got like two sides of my brain going in equally opposite directions. Like I appreciate the sort of commitment to the bit to make you remember where you parked your car, but also it would be kind of cool to call upon it, whatever. And I kind of want it, but also don't want it to change at the same time. Weirdly specific problems are weirdly specific. Oh yeah, also, should probably go check out some of these items that we gave people. Like, this particular guy probably wants some of those goodies from before. Don't have any proper armor for him yet, but he definitely wants to get a bit more health going, because everything keeps going after him. Also, probably wants a bit of poison resistance, because that stuff is 10%, so appreciate that. Also, Dancer doesn't heal very much. Can probably go ahead and let her have that regen item. I love that you get this particularly early. I know it's a weird thing to appreciate, but when it comes to an early item like that, I don't know. A lot of the RPGs that I specifically loved give you a early regeneration item. It doesn't mean that they have to. It doesn't mean that it's the ultimate sign of a good RPG. It's just for some reason it's a thing that always happens to happen. So, for example, like I really love Sultan Sanctuary. You can start off with a early recovery item. I really love Dark Souls 2, and you get that right after your first boss. It sucks, but you do get it right after your first boss. I mean, I don't know if I'm the only weirdo that repeatedly played through Dark Souls 2 and insisted on trying to use that crappy recovery effect, only to be completely blinded on it because I was playing it on PS3, yet like that effect absolutely killed the game on PS3. So you're constantly lagging to have a really slow regeneration effect. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, so I really loved that one there. Anyways, whatever. We're getting far beyond off track here. So would I recommend this for the, what is it, like $10 or so price point? Yes, abso-freaking-lutely. This is a really, really well-designed game. Again, solid understanding of world design, solid understanding of what made a lot of these classics, actual classics. Really fun kind of class differentiations between these different units, causing them to play differently, have different logistics and all of that. Good amount of limitations with still having some freedom of options. So, like for example, somebody like the knight would simply not be able to use any magic at all, but they can reflect it. Or somebody like the warrior would be more like a jack of all trades that gets access to some magic there. Or somebody like the thief is all about using their tricks and whatnot. It just feels good. Feels good. It's really solid design overall. I've heard, I saw my friend went and put a review out on this one, saying that it's basically a better designed Final Fantasy 1. And yeah, absolutely. We definitely agree on that one. Funnily enough, like as far as the as far as the design of the world goes, part of the reason that I had my main character in this particular team named as she was again due to this old DOS RPG that I grew up with, Avalon there. Like, I saw the dancer with the green hair. It reminded me immediately of the main character's girlfriend in that one. Um, but yeah, no, the like that feeling of going back to old areas and seeing how they've changed with different world events. It just feels good there. I really love that particular feeling. Um, Again, the constant questions as to what happened to people in every new area that you go to, like why are there ruins? Why is this person exploring this thing here? What are all these other NPCs doing here? And that kind of realization over time, like, well, shoot, this is kind of like some almost fantasy Hunger Games type scenario to some degree. If you start noticing what all the NPCs are talking about. But yeah, no, it's just cool. It's just cool. I don't want to go into more detail than that. So yeah, very solid recommendation. Go get it at your earliest convenience, and yeah, if you have any questions on kind of balancing or any kind of mechanics or whatever else, the developer is actually over in their Discord regularly going and taking back feedback and trying to explain things and whatnot else. So you can probably get an answer or potentially get adjustments made for stuff that you potentially may like. For example, there was one particular room that by the time you get there, there's a pretty solid idea that, or a pretty solid chance that room actually might have been changed. That people generally refer to as the Mammoth Room, where there is one particular kind of, I guess you could say, puzzle gauntlet of a situation where it's just a gigantic sprawling maze with mandatory encounter tiles as well as roaming boss units. So, as I mentioned, a lot of dungeons have unique mechanics, whether it's hazards, whether it's roaming bosses, like just a lava T-Rex, why not? You'll notice that there's a lot of interesting gimmicks to these different maps, and that particular one ended up getting a lot of people stuck. I know for me personally, that room got me stuck for probably a solid almost quarter of my playthrough as I kept leaving and trying to find any other way to progress. But it sounds like that's being changed because, again, they're taking feedback, and that's always a good thing. How you feel about hidden mechanics is entirely up to you. Personally, I feel like that beginning section does a pretty solid job of explaining what those hidden mechanics are, but it would be cool if there was a little bit of a tooltip in the early section of just like, hey, there's more to these classes, maybe pay attention to what they're doing, something like that. It would probably get that idea a lot better, because I know my first time through, I didn't really pick up on the passives of a lot of the characters, and/or I was kind of underestimating how far into the mechanics the game might go. So, for example, my Duskar character is somebody that steals health on attack as a passive, which you notice right away, but then start wondering, like, hey, is this thing broken? Because a lot of the enemies that you're fighting are actually undead and therefore have no health to steal. But that may not necessarily be clear, because you're looking at remnants and it's like, oh, this dude's like a bit of a husk, but it's still like a dude, right? And it turns out it's just like a zombie or something, Or let's say you're attacking a statue and that statue might have looked like a person. So, just understand that, it does go a little bit more mechanically in depth than you may initially be expecting. So there's that too. So I feel like you could have used a little tooltip there. And ooh, what the hell is this? Okay, new area. Yeah, I should probably mention there's a lot of hidden areas. Like little hidden shortcuts behind stuff and whatever else. Ooh, fairy shield, what's that? What do you do? Although it's actually a light shield, I should probably save that for Mr. Blitzball over here. Sorry, I just saw that face. I'm like, this dude's Titus. Had to. Ooh, item strength plus 25%. I will take that. Actually, I should probably mention one more thing as far as the logistics and stuff are concerned. So any effects that you actually have in your battle situation also apply to your overworld situation. So, like, let's go back to this other save file over here. we had cases where like a lot of the equipment on let's say my monk over here was going and reducing the cost of his MP. He also has a passive that reduced the cost of his MP, and he essentially recovers a percentage of everything. Overall, this end up translating to the point that any of his lower cost abilities are now just free. So like let's say his basic recovery spell over here with enough efficiency, its cost became 0. So now he's able to just do that for free, and his let's say full party heal only costs 1, so he can essentially recover more than he's actually spending on some abilities and stuff. So that's really cool in and of itself as well. So, for example, those item effects, let's say you have gloves that improve the effectiveness of your items. Let's say you have a shield that improves the effectiveness of your items. You naturally improve the effectiveness of your items. Like, let's say, again, the hunter does here. I keep calling them ranger, not hunter, but whatever, same deal. And so all of those things will actually stack, and they'll apply in the menu. So, like, let's say you go to your items, it'll automatically use whatever your item potency is, whatever the highest one is in the party. So, like, let's say the items that are supposed to heal something like 500 instead heal about 1700 for this team here. So that's pretty darn cool. I really love that that's a thing as well. So overall, its design is a thing of beauty. You know, it's just constantly more stuff to go and praise, more stuff to go and enjoy, more kind of party stuff to play around with. And yeah, they more or less start you off immediately trying to train you about different mechanics. Like, one of the early areas that you'll run into will give you an axe that improves aggro. But what is aggro? Well, you'll notice we actually don't have a front row and a back row. I love how we're getting to this mechanic this late into the review. But when it comes to your aggro percentage, that's actually how likely that character is to be targeted. From what I understand, the more that they attack or whatever else, the more they generate aggro as well. So as long as your frontliner is attacking, they will always be the one getting attacked. I believe it'll like maybe have a like somewhat lower chance to target the next one under them or something like that. But you can, for example, set somebody's aggro to 0 so that they only get targeted by AoEs and stuff. And that's what allows you to get away with builds, for example, like you saw earlier with physical defense that basically just bottoms out to nothing. And hell, you might even be able to weaponize that. Like, I had one instance of a boss that I was fighting, in which I stacked more or less bottoming out their defense to the point that enemy spells scaled extremely high, along with a magic reflection effect, causing a boss to hit themselves for about 24,000 damage as the fight started. Because I was noticing they kept opening up with a certain big kind of AoE spell. Especially would counter with it, and so with that magic reflection effect, with them kind of upscaling damage versus themselves, they were able to attack the boss, counter its magical counterattack, and then essentially cause the boss to delete itself, which, again, is just a ton of fun. And for that matter, hell, there's even unique spell effects that you can potentially get off of different counterattacks. Like, later on, there's a set of armor that you can go slap on any of your heavy frontliners that causes them to counter with a party-wide black hole sweep kind of thing. But again, there's just more and more and more and more and more, and I could keep on going on about this for ages. You get the idea. This game is amazing. And if you love RPGs at all, especially if you are looking to kind of relive that classic feeling, I mean, you want to see one that's damn well designed, Scarmonde's your game, alright? So, y'all have yourselves a good one, take care, and I will see you in the next one. Later.